Hi, Dr. Hertlein. Welcome to this series of Q&A on my YouTube channel.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
Great. I know that you're so busy, so thank you for your time. Um, Everyone knows you, but just for people who may not know, newly join our field, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Kat Hertlein, and I'm a professor in the Couple and Family Therapy program in the Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Awesome, thank you. And could you please tell us about your professional background in terms of what you do and your interests?
Sure, yes. So I obtained my master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Purdue University Calumet. I got my doctorate degree in human development with a specialization in marriage and family therapy from Virginia Tech,
Mhm.
and then ended up coming out here for this job in Las Vegas, thinking it might be a short-term thing, but have been here since 2005 and loving it. So my interests are in the areas of technology and couples, technology in the therapy room and how you would use it, and in sexuality.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've been so privileged to work with you on a chapter about technology and relationships. So I'm so excited. So for the start, what do you think about how technology and dating apps have influenced dating and relationships?
They've influenced them quite a bit. So part of it is in how the approach in dating is made. The first part of dating is, of course, trying to figure out who it is that you'd like to date. Right?
Mhm.
So that has changed that process. Technology and apps have taken us from just looking at maybe a general room and trying to figure out who's attracted to us,
Mhm.
and given us the ability to be able to maybe be more narrow or more specific in what it is that we're looking for. We have the ability to be able to sort people in different categories in terms of age or finances. And so that's an interesting feature of technology.
Mhm.
Sometimes the way in which people identify themselves in terms of those boxes is
Mhm.
accurate. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not. But there we have it. So it's a little bit different in terms of that. The second thing is it changes the opportunities. We now have the ability to be able to meet and connect with people who are not just within our immediate geographic region. And I think that opens up to a lot of interesting opportunities, but also a lot of interesting challenges.
Exactly. So I think a lot of times just public audience, they pathologize like technology in terms of the impact of it on relationships, right? Do we have any data that shows technology and this social media increase or decrease intimacy in relationships?
Yes, in fact, the literature is a little bit conflicted in that. And I think it's because technology does both.
Hmm.
When we look at couple relationships and when we look at the development of intimacy, it's about being a responsive partner. It's about being a partner that understands your partner's needs. It's about making sure you're providing support when your partner is asking for it, right? Technology has the ability to do all these things, but the users often define how they use technology in ways that are either going to support the relationship or not. So, for example, one of the things we know is that when people want support, they need to communicate in synchronous ways.
Hmm.
And when people want to solve a problem, their better solution is through asynchronous methods. But couples don't know that.
Hmm.
And often couples are not clear on their level of motivation or their specific the content of their motivation, whether they're looking for support or looking to solve a problem. The other thing is there's a lot of reliance on text messaging.
Hmm.
And text messaging, really, it's asynchronous because that person is not guaranteed to be there, but we think it's synchronous.
Hmm.
And so you have people sort of asking for support in ways that they think are synchronous that really aren't, and then making judgments about that and making interpretations and relationships sort of falling apart. The other ways in which it really builds intimacy is our ability to be able to self disclose and to be, in some ways, a more immediate response.
Hmm.
The way in which intimacy is developed is through self disclosure and how people respond to those self disclosures over text messaging or over media. Because perhaps you can't see me, I have to do a lot more self disclosure for you to understand where I'm at and what's happening to me. I
Hmm.
might have to type out things like, I'm really upset because you can't see my face,
Hmm.
or I'm very tearful about what happened today. Okay.
Hmm.
all of that self-disclosure is going to build intimacy much more quickly than in relationships where you're not using those technologies and you're not doing that self-disclosure. This is incidentally why when people are in a relationship and they sort of start talking to somebody else on the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have that relationship off to the side develop much more quickly. And they think this then must be my soulmate. This must be the person with whom I'm meant to be because they get me, they understand me.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is you were self-disclosing in ways that you're actually not doing with your partner. And
Wow.
if you'd done it with your partner, you would have that same level of intimacy. So technology, I think, does both.
Wow, that is just so interesting. Like, wow, yeah. So it gives like it takes everything like into perspective, I guess, like from another angle. So that is so interesting. So I know that so I grew up in Iran and they moved to the US. I know that even like growing up in Iran, another country, all I watched was this like Hollywood movies and the idea that I had about romantic relationship was like from those movies. And today, like it's different. Like not only like we have all these different things, but we have social media and we have access to all these different figures, influencers, and we see their relationships, and usually everything on Instagram is just so fun and romantic. Like how would that impact the picture or the idea that we have about romantic relationship or sexual relationship?
That's a great question. One of the things I've noticed in my practice over the years is the way in which couples regard their relationship has changed.
Mm,
I see more couples now who are expecting the fairy tale, who
mm,
expect that their partner can read their mind, who expect that they go on these romantic vacations. And that hasn't been reality. And when I first heard it in session from a couple, I thought, well, this person, really doesn't understand what a relationship is. Perhaps they haven't been socialized.
mm.
But then I kept hearing it. I keep hearing it from couples who come in and say, but
Yeah.
isn't this the ideal? So I actually think it's making things more complicated
Mm,
and more unrealistic for couples.
mhm,
A second thing that happens is we have to look at the qualities of who's posting what. Lots of times in relationships, there are people who are posting as a way to sort of hide or not identify the things that are going on in their relationship that are problematic. So perhaps the more positive you post, the less secure you actually feel about your relationship.
mm,
There's also some research that talks about when people are posting information about their relationship, does their partner respond to that post or not respond to that post? And then what is the quality of that relationship?
mhm,
And then finally, you have another group of people who sort of look at what people are posting, whether those pictures or those statements are accurate or not. But then taking that and comparing with where they are in their life, doing this
mm,
social comparison and going, gee, I'm just not hitting the mark. Leon Festinger, who wrote a lot about cognitive dissonance way back in the day, also has a theory about social comparison from like 1954.
mm.
And if
Wow.
you actually go back and look at his 10 phases of social comparison back in 1954, it reads like how people interact with social media today.
Wow, amazing. That's so interesting. So, would you say, like, at the end of the day, with all these different complexities and things that we have today, it goes back to how intentional you are about your relationship? Like, either you're using technology, you're not using technology. Like, it's not like because there are all these different things. It's just inevitable. Like technology and all these, like tomorrow we'll have meta and virtual universe, whatever, right? So but at the end of the day, it's about how intentional you are about all these different things you do. Does that make sense, or what would you think about that?
I agree with that. I think you have to be an educated consumer about technology. I think you have to be clear on your motivation, why you're using a particular technology. You have to be mindful and intentional about what it is that you're communicating. You have to be someone who understands that what may be coming your way from your partner may not be the whole story, might have been cut off by someone walking into their space or being interrupted, or just having an understanding that those communication patterns or what you're seeing in terms of the communication
Mm,
may not be the whole picture, and
mm-hmm,
being able to provide grace for that without making judgment about your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I've realized about couples and relationships, and I thought about this when I was doing my Fulbright project. I had the opportunity to go to Austria and teach at the University of Salzburg and do a research project on how people use technology in their relationships. And I cannot say enough amazing things about the Fulbright organization, and perhaps that can be a whole nother show. But what I was doing when I was interviewing a lot of these participants about how they're using technology in their relationships, and help me understand your decision making about when you send a text versus when you send an email
Mm-hmm.
versus when you sort of bug your partner versus when you block, like
Mm-hmm.
help me understand your decision making around that. I started to understand that a lot of our decision making around technology has to do with anxiety management. I sort of thought that that was a uniquely American thing, that we
Mm-hmm.
sort of got anxious, we were attached to our phones, and we couldn't manage our anxiety very well anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what I discovered is that the way in which people use technology is really becoming a way that we are starting to globally manage our anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's not a good thing, right? Instead of managing our anxiety, or even sitting in our anxiety when our partner doesn't respond to us right away,
Mm-hmm.
I learned what we're doing across cultures is checking their Facebook, checking their pages, seeing where they're at, looking to see if they got the message. Was it sent? Was it delivered? Are they, who are they talking to? Are they not talking to me? Well, fine, I guess it's over, right? We sort of go into this tailspin because we've just relied on this device to
Yeah.
manage our anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And that is happening globally.
Yeah, that is so interesting. It may not make sense, but it reminded me of like Bowen, right? The triangulation and
Very
technology
much
that
so.
yeah.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, and I'm thinking here, like, so we can look at this whole technology thing from a kind of like pathologize the whole thing, or maybe we can think about pros and cons, right? These are the ways
Yes.
that may, if we use it,
Yes.
like it would be harmful, and probably, as you mentioned earlier, there are some ways that when we use it, like it's helpful, right? It can help with intimacy and all these different things.
For sure. For sure. Technology does two things. And the two things it does are not uh, good or bad, like you said.
Hmm.
It depends on how the person is using it and the cultural context in which they're embedded. Okay.
Hmm.
So what it does is it changes the structure of our relationships, which mean it changes how we start relationships, which
Hmm.
I mentioned a little bit in terms of the dating piece.
Hmm.
It affects, oh, I'm sorry, the structure is the roles, rules, and boundaries, right?
Hmm.
So what is permissible, what is okay, who takes the role in what does that look like in terms of the structure of how we organize our communication. And then it changes the process of relationships.
Hmm.
That is how relationships start, how they're maintained, and how they end. And you can use it in ways that are productive and helpful, or you can use it in ways that sort of blow up and self-destruct the relationship.
Hmm.
And for example, I might set a particular role or boundary that works for me in my relationship, and that may not work for somebody else,
Hmm.
right? So it really, in that way, becomes culturally dependent and contextually dependent, depending on what the couple is going through.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it makes me think of like the meaning of trust and commitment in relationship, that sometimes we assume that they have like universal definitions versus like it really depends on the couple, the partners in a relationship, right? So do you think that given what we have talked so far, technology and the access that we have to all these different social media information, does it impact the like role of open relationship for people? Like people now, they are more interested in open relationships because they are seeing all these different things in social media, or they have technology. What do you think about that?
I think what technology does is it increases opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you accessible to other people.
Mm-hmm.
It makes other people accessible to you.
Mm-hmm.
So in that frame, I think there are people who were always going to orient themselves toward an open relationship. I think there are people who, no matter what the technology is, would never open themselves up to an open relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you've got this group of people who might do both and could be influenced by
Mm-hmm.
having opportunity or being accessible to others, right? And I think for that group, technology makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. So some people, they could like love a style that you have. So love a style, or the kind of like idea that you have about relationships. Maybe like social media like expose you to different ideas, right? And
For
again, like you can
sure.
be like We can be say, hey, no, or yes, for sure, or you feel like hesitant about it, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The more exposure, the more opportunity, the more accessibility,
Mm-hmm.
the more it might take that group and say, hey, listen, maybe this is another idea.
Great. So if I remember correctly, I think it was some years ago that you had a session or talk at AMFT about technology. I think even like the title was like, "Hey Siri, save my relationship or marriage," something
Yes.
like that, with a
Yes, that
colleague.
was it.
So do we have any, like today, do we have research-based or, evidence about some technology-based, maybe interventions, behavioral interventions that we can do with couples if any therapist who is watching this like interested in that?
Yes, we know a ton
Mhm.
about technology and service delivery. And unfortunately, COVID has also been helpful in that understanding and that research base. And precisely what you mentioned, the behavioral interventions and things that are delivered over technology that are operating from a CBT perspective or have
Mhm.
elements of CBT,
Mhm.
whether it's education
Mhm.
components, behavior change, those are the ones that have been tested most often
Mhm.
and are demonstrated to have an effectiveness that is the same as in person for the most part. And for many disorders, lots of for eating disorders, for family therapy issues, for PTSD, depression, anxiety. So a lot of the common diagnoses can be helped with the utilization of technology in that kind of service delivery. The other thing is for couple and family therapists, we really look to not just sort of replace our in-person work
Mhm.
with a technological
Yeah.
device, right? We
Mhm.
want to, I think, still meet with the client, but we want to maybe use technology as an
Mhm.
adjunct.
Mhm.
And that is a really, really important thing. I work with another company called Blue Heart, and they have an application that does try to help couples.
Mhm.
But there are some times where couples say, listen, I've worked through the pieces on your app and I'm just not able to move past this one activity or this one
Mhm.
exercise. So for those reasons, we also need to say, hey, it might be appropriate to make a therapeutic referral. And we're using both technology and in-person services hand in hand.
Mhm.
So a couple and family therapist really needs to look at what is the need for
Mhm.
a particular application prior to recommending it to a client. You want to make sure that you're aware of any laws or any regulatory
Mhm.
requirements specific to any application. You want to make sure that your client is going to be comfortable using it. We want to make sure that whatever theory you're using and app you recommend, that there's
Mhm.
going to be a good fit
Mhm.
between those two. If you've
Mhm.
got a client who says, I don't want to do CBT, then don't give them a CBT oriented app, right?
Yeah.
And that you have conversations about what the record is going to be like, what sharing is going to be like, and just making sure that you walk through with the client on how to use the app and if they have questions, who they can go to.
Great. So, speaking of that, so if someone is interested in, getting trained in this kind of like behavior BIT, is there like any kind of like training center for that, and or is there any sort of modality that goes with that, aligned with those interventions better? I know that a lot of times when we think about or talk about couples therapy, the first options that come to mind is EFT, Gottman, those kinds of things or methods. What do you suggest? Like, is there any modality that is, more a good fit for technology-based interventions?
I think that's a good question. I think when we consider what the research base is in terms of the applications, I still think you're looking at things that are CBT oriented. There are some applications that are designed to address even some of the attachment work or having couples perhaps do some experiential activities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way where I've seen the app development go. Um, let's see. I think those are anything that's recording like journaling, anything that's recording a journal
Mm-hmm.
or tracking your mood. So, but again, in that case, you're probably talking about apps that relate better to CBT.
Mm-hmm.
Solution focus might be
Mm-hmm.
another theoretical orientation that would be great because a lot of the apps want to show you change over time. They
Yeah.
want to show you that you're improving. And so when I think about what theories are designed to sort of move that direction, that's another that's another theory that might work really well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So another question that I had is when you work with couples and relationship, part of the work could be about sex therapy. For people who are watching this, do they need like to get certification in sex therapy? Can they work like with couples about sex therapy without certification? Like, what is your recommendation on that aspect?
I think you can do either, and I
Hmm.
think you have to be careful about how you are marketing yourself. Okay, so
Hmm.
for example, if you are not a certified sex therapist, don't hang up your little shingle that says I'm a certified sex therapist.
Hmm.
At the same time, you can say that you treat couples using sex therapy principles, or you use sex therapy in your
Hmm.
practice. I think there's a difference between saying I use sex therapy in my practice
Hmm.
versus I'm a certified sex therapist.
Yeah.
Just make sure that you're advertising yourself a way that's consistent with your degree and your discipline.
Yeah. I think that's the same thing about some other like approaches or techniques or
Sure.
modalities. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
EMDR certified
yeah,
versus I do EMDR, right? That's
exactly.
another example. So,
Yeah,
just make sure you're in your lane, right?
yeah. And I hope that everyone who watches this, just because you watch one video on YouTube about EMDR, that doesn't mean like you can do EMDR or anything else. So just
Correct.
have the
Right. Right.
appropriate training. So when you think about the work with couples and technology, all these different things, what do you think about the role of self of the therapist in all of that?
It is incredibly important
Hmm.
in working with couples. I think, and specifically couples in technology, we as therapists have our own perspectives, our own ideas, our own attitudes
Hmm.
about technology. And we have discovered in the earlier research that those attitudes really inform how we utilize those in therapy. For many, many years, a lot of the other disciplines and fields like social work and counselor, they were way ahead of couple and family therapy as a discipline in terms of regulating and understanding the impact of how you would use technology in the room. And so much of it, what we found in our research was that there are attitudes that we as systemic therapists have that no, we value the relationship and therefore we need
Hmm.
to have people in front of us and we're not willing to entertain
Hmm.
um, people over telehealth. That has changed, thankfully, but we're sort of behind the eight ball, I think, as a discipline because we started out with this negative perception of technology. We somehow thought that you couldn't develop a relationship in that way. So that's one of the self of the therapist issues that is really important. Just because you value relationships doesn't mean that you devalue utilizing technology, or it doesn't have to, but
Mm.
just recognize that your attitude about these technologies is going to be really important.
Yeah.
The second thing is using self of the therapist in couples work generally outside of technology. That becomes really important.
Mhm.
Part of what happens in couples therapy is you're playing this game of unbalancing. And I tell my couples, I'm not going to do, 50, if we do a 50-minute session, I'm not going to do 25 minutes I talk to you, 25 minutes I talk to you. That's not how I balance things. I might say things like, today we're focusing on you, and the whole time I might say things like, by the way, next time it's your turn, so get ready. Right? Like so it's unbalanced in a
Mhm.
different way, and you have to really be checked in with yourself. You have to understand what you're feeling in your body and be able to put that back in the room in a way that's going to be advantageous to the couple.
Yeah, yeah. That is so important. And sometimes it seems easy, but it's not easy at all. Like,
No, it isn't easy because
exactly.
everybody's talking at you.
Yeah.
So you're trying to pay attention to this and trying to pay attention to this and
Yeah.
then figure out a sentence and where am I going to break in? And it's really tough.
Yeah, and you're looking for change. And
Yeah, right, right, right. Right,
right.
right, right, right.
And it's so interesting. And that about like self of the therapist, a lot of times in supervisions, I ask my supervisors that like when they work with a couple, I ask like, who do you take side with like in your head? And they say, no one, like I'm not taking side. I'm like in
Always
your
taking
head,
a side.
right? You need to be mindful of that bias, right? So you
Yes,
can,
yes, you're always taking a side. Yeah.
yeah.
And by the way, it's okay to take a side. I tell my students the myth of neutrality in couples therapy can really interfere with you doing your work. Sometimes when you see something going on that's inappropriate, you have to say something.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want a therapist who is necessarily neutral. about my marriage. I want you getting involved. Like,
Yeah.
I want you to say something, right? It's like the TSA. If you see something, say something. Right? And that's
Exactly.
our job as therapists.
Exactly. And even like about all these different things, we have different values, different perspectives, right? So if one partner is cheating on the other one, or whatever, and you feel like just in your own values that's just such a bad thing, whatever, like you need to be mindful of that. You need to like see that, so your work would be beneficial in what you're doing.
For
So,
sure.
as you know, a lot of times our students in couples and family therapy, they want to become a couples therapist. So they are so interested in that. Do you have any piece of advice for them in terms of, again, like theory, the work itself, the whole journey? Do you have any advice for them?
I think being a couples therapist is about being direct.
Mm-hmm.
I think the couples that I've worked with who maybe have come to me from another practitioner that perhaps wasn't helpful felt like they were directing treatment and the therapist wasn't. You've got to recognize that by the time a couple comes to you and the research supports this, it's years already into the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you are the last stop shopping. You're right. So I'm very cognizant of that. I don't think to myself, well, if it doesn't work out, who cares? Like, I feel like, okay, this is it. It's time to get serious. You have a position as a leader in that room. When I teach couples therapy, that semester long course, the second or third week in the semester, I think it's the second week, we're talking about leadership. And I go over different kinds of leadership and how to be a leader in the room. Okay. So that is something that is not taught in our traditional coursework. We're often wrapped up in the theories, but your position in the room is so critical to the outcome of treatment that cannot be understated. The second thing is you've got to be able to recognize pathology. You have to. It is so prevalent. And I know I hear a lot of this from my students. I don't like to diagnose. I don't want to give labels, but you have to.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. If you are going to embark on a couples therapy encounter and there is someone who's got a personality disorder, and they're more frequent than you realize, by the way, more frequent than you realize. If you go down that path of not recognizing it and going through a couples therapy process with someone, you're going to do harm to the other person and you're not even going to know it. Couples therapists have to be very good at individual psychology. You have to. So go back to your DSM class, take trainings on personality disorders, read books about sociopathy, because if you miss it, you will do harm.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think we have this love and hate relationship with DSM, right, in
Right.
different ways. But as you mentioned, it's very important in many different cases, and it can make harm to clients if you do not
Yeah,
recognize
and
it.
your client's not going to get better, and you're not going to know why.
Mm-hmm.
But why they didn't get better is you didn't do a proper diagnosis. You thought it was a relational problem when it was a relational problem caused by someone's distortions, someone's projection,
Mm-hmm.
someone's splitting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I would say, if you don't like the DSM, that's fine. Two things I would say: go to the back of the book in the DSM.
Mm-hmm.
They have a section on the alternative model of personality disorder diagnosis. And that, for many students, makes much more intuitive sense than the stuff that's in the middle of the book. So go to page 800 something, go 850, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the second thing is take trainings on personality disorders. Often they'll read you the DSM diagnosis, blah, 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 but they'll describe the disorder in such a way that you can go, up, now I've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got it. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be my recommendation. You've got to be a very strong leader and a strong diagnostician to be able to work with couples.
Yeah, for sure. And just out of curiosity, do you feel like, or do you think that the goal of couples therapy is like happy ending, or do you feel like it's
Oh, no.
clarification?
Oh, no. I don't
Yeah.
think that at all.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the goal of couples therapy is going to depend on what the couple wants. For me, it's about breaking patterns.
Yeah.
Whatever the pattern is, do something different. I very much am am inspired by Bill Doherty's work on discernment counseling
Yes.
and use that routinely. If you start a couples therapy process with a couple who has divorce on the table, you are going the wrong direction.
Yes.
110%. That training changed the way that I do couples therapy,
Exactly.
180.
Mhm.
Okay. So I don't do that anymore. I don't make those same mistakes anymore. And then the second thing is, once I have an agreement with a couple to do the work, we have 6 months and we're looking at specific patterns that we're trying to intervene on. So couples therapy is about breaking patterns and intervening on patterns.
Yeah.
And then the couple can make their decision about whether that's going to make them happy or not happy. That's up to them.
Yeah, yeah. I often tell this to my couples and also my students that I don't know, maybe 60 years ago, I was not alive, but maybe in that time, and the goal of couples therapy was like be this glue and connect people and the happy ending, right? But today that is not the goal, right? Because a
That
lot
is
of
not the
times I see
goal.
that in students, like they feel so bad because oh my God, and I say like, hey, the goal is like as you mentioned, breaking patterns and also clarification, right?
That's
That
it.
three levels
Yes.
that Bill
Get
Doherty
clarity.
three options, right? If you want to stay together like this way, status quo. If you want to, get divorced or separate, and if you want to work on your relationship, just be clear on your decision, and you're the
Yes,
expert of your life, right? So you know what you make that why you make that decision. But I hope that in these sessions, in our conversation, we can get some clarification on that.
for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. So my last question for you is, what would you tell the young version of yourself when you were an MFT student about becoming a therapist?
I would say you know more than you think. I know it's hard to believe, but I spent the early part of my career and as a student going, I'm not sure I'm good enough for this. And the imposter syndrome was quite active.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some really great mentors who believed in me no matter what and said, no, Kat, your ideas are good and they're worth publishing and they're worth this and they're worth that. So that would be the first thing I would really say. You've got to believe in yourself. You can absolutely do the things you're doing and you're better than you think you are. I had an experience where I had a couple's case come in and I told my practicum instructor at the time, I said, I don't know. I don't know how to work with couples. I don't know how to do this. And he said, well, don't you see kids? So yeah, that's all I see. All I see is child family cases all the time. He goes, well, Kat, if you're seeing child family cases, you're actually working with parents all the time in their couple relationship. You just didn't acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to sort of have that earlier on and to know that just because I don't have perhaps that client type in front of me doesn't mean I'm not doing the work, doesn't mean I'm not learning about systems, doesn't mean I can't be helpful. I think that's really important. Another thing I would say to the earlier me is to keep training and keep going. I feel like the more I learn, the less I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I always now get excited about more and more trainings about depression or anxiety or things that I thought I probably knew years
Mm-hmm.
ago, but I'm learning I don't, or I could learn them differently.
Mm-hmm.
So always continue to have an open mind and an open perspective when it comes to what you think you already know and already learned.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so inspiring. You are so inspiring. I still cannot believe that I had this, privilege and opportunity to work with you when I was a PhD student. Like that was just, I was like, oh my God. So really, I appreciate all you're doing for all of us. And you don't say it, but I wear this T-shirt like it says "Women, Life, Freedom." It's
Oh,
inspired by what's happening in Iran. So I think
yes,
like adding to what you just mentioned, like about that imposter syndrome or all these messages that we get from society, and even like ourselves as mentors. So I think it's just important to be very mindful of our biases and help our students and supervisors to, enhance the possibilities, right? And sometimes
absolutely.
we feel like we're trying to help them with our feedback, but like we're just crushing the souls, right? So I think that's just very important. And you are
Well,
a
I
role model,
appreciate
inspiring.
the kind words. I appreciate working with you so much. You're such an amazing individual, and I am just grateful that you asked me to participate.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time. This conversation, I think it was very helpful for me, and I hope that it's very helpful for the listeners and people who watch it. Thank you. Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too.